I exposed my sister-in-law's manipulation campaign, revealed how she rewired my wife against me, served divorce papers, and took back my freedom. Our rhythm, our inside jokes, our quiet Sunday mornings. We weren't perfect, but we were solid. That was before her sister showed up at our door with 2 suitcases and a story about how all men are trash. It was a Thursday evening when the doorbell rang. I was finishing up some work at the kitchen table when my wife rushed to answer it. Through the hallway I could hear the conversation getting emotional fast. Her sister was standing there, mascara streaked down her cheeks, looking like she'd been through a war zone. "He threw me out," she kept repeating. "After 8 years, he just threw me out like garbage." My wife immediately went into protective mode, pulling her sister inside and shooting me a look that said, "Be nice." I'd always gotten along with her family, so I played the supportive brother-in-law role, made coffee, offered the guest room, asked if she needed anything. Standard procedure for family crisis management. But something felt off from minute 1. The way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, like she was studying me, waiting for me to slip up somehow. When I offered to help carry her bags upstairs, she waved me off with a tight smile and said, "I can handle my own things. Thanks." Over dinner that first night, the real show started. She began telling us about her marriage, painting her ex-husband as some kind of monster, controlling, manipulative, emotionally abusive. Every story ended the same way. That's just how men are. My wife kept glancing at me during these stories, and I could see something shifting in her expression. Not suspicion exactly, but curiosity, like she was comparing notes in her head. I just ignored all the red flags while her sister continued stabbing at her salad. The way he'd interrupt me during conversations. How he always had to have the last word. The subtle ways he made me feel small. I stayed quiet, letting her vent. Everyone processes breakups differently, and she clearly needed to get it off her chest. But then she turned to my wife with a serious look and said, "You're lucky you found a good one. Most of us aren't that fortunate." The compliment should have felt good, but it didn't. There was something in the way she said it, like she was setting up a punchline that hadn't landed yet. After dinner, while I was loading the dishwasher, I overheard them talking in the living room. Her sister was going into more detail, and every few minutes I'd hear my wife make little sounds of agreement. That's terrible. I can't believe he did that." When my wife came to bed that night, she was quieter than usual. I asked if she was okay, and she said she was just processing everything her sister had been through. Fair enough. Divorce is heavy stuff, especially when it's someone close to you. But as she was getting ready for bed, she said something that stuck with me. "I never realized how lucky I am. Her ex sounds awful." Again, it should have been a compliment, but the way she said it made it sound like she was surprised to be lucky, like she'd been expecting something different all along. The next morning, I got up early to make breakfast before work. It's something I do most weekdays, nothing special, just part of our routine. But when her sister came downstairs and saw me at the stove, she made this comment. "Wow, he actually cooks. You trained him well." My wife laughed, but it was an uncomfortable laugh. "He's always been helpful around the house," she said. "That's good," her sister replied, pouring herself coffee. "My ex used to help too, in the beginning. They all do, until they don't." I served them both plates and sat down to eat, but the atmosphere had changed. What used to be easy morning conversation between my wife and me now felt awkward, like we had an audience judging our every interaction. Throughout that first week, I started noticing the pattern. Every conversation somehow circled back to relationships and how men behave. Her sister had an opinion about everything, and they all boiled down to the same theme: men are fundamentally selfish, and women who trust them are naive. By Friday, my wife was asking me questions she'd never asked before. Why did I choose to work late on Tuesday? Was there a reason I didn't text back immediately when she messaged me during lunch? Small things, but pointed questions that felt like tests. I answered honestly every time, because I had nothing to hide. But I could see her processing my responses through this new filter her sister had installed. Everything I said was being measured against stories of betrayal and disappointment she'd been hearing all week. The breaking point of that first week came during a casual conversation about weekend plans. I suggested we have dinner at that Italian place we both love, and my wife seemed into the idea, until her sister chimed in with, "Oh, he's making the decisions about where you go. How traditional." The comment hung in the air like smoke. My wife looked at me differently for a second, like she was seeing something she hadn't noticed before. Then she quickly said, "We always decide together." but the damage was done. That night, as we were getting ready for bed, my wife asked, "Do you think I'm too passive in our relationship?" The question came out of nowhere. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she said, avoiding eye contact. "Sometimes I wonder if I speak up enough, if I advocate for myself enough." I told her I thought she was perfect the way she was, that our relationship worked because we respected each other. But I could tell she wasn't really listening. She was somewhere else, thinking about conversations she'd been having all week with someone who had very different ideas about what respect. As I turned off the light that night, I realized something important. Her sister wasn't here to recover from her divorce. She was here to recruit, and my wife was starting to listen. Week 2 was when the real poison started flowing. Her sister had settled into our routine like she belonged there, and every day brought a new lesson in how terrible men could be. What bothered me most wasn't the stories themselves, but how carefully crafted they were, each one designed to plant a specific seed of doubt. Monday morning, I was running 10 minutes late because of traffic. Nothing unusual, happens to everyone. But when I walked through the door, her sister was already in the kitchen with my wife, shaking her head sympathetically. "Traffic again?" she asked, but her tone suggested she already knew better. My ex used to use that excuse all the time. Turned out he was stopping by his coworker's place to decompress, after work. My wife looked at me with a new expression, like she was calculating something. "Traffic was really bad on the interstate," I explained, but I could see her mentally filing the information away for later analysis. Tuesday brought the domestic partnership lecture. I'd finished my coffee and left my mug on the counter instead of putting it directly in the dishwasher, a habit of 3 years that had never been an issue before. Her sister noticed immediately. "Oh, the invisible woman syndrome," she said to my wife while I was still in earshot. "They leave things lying around because they know someone else will clean up after them. It's a power move, whether they realize it or not." My wife picked up my mug and looked at it like it was evidence of some deeper character flaw. "He usually cleans up after himself," she said, but even she sounded uncertain now. "They all do until they get comfortable," her sister replied. "Comfort breeds entitlement. Trust me, I've lived it." By Wednesday, every conversation had become a minefield. Her sister had perfected the art of the loaded question, and my wife was starting to ask them too. During dinner, I mentioned that a colleague had gotten a promotion, and my wife immediately asked, "Is that the same colleague you had lunch with last month?" It was such a strange question that I actually laughed. "Yeah, why?" "Just curious," she said. But her sister was nodding approvingly, like my wife had passed some kind of test. Thursday was the financial independence speech. Her sister had been going through her divorce paperwork at the kitchen table when I got home, and she made sure to include both of us in her running commentary about asset division and spousal support. "The hardest part is realizing how dependent I let myself become," she said, waving a bank statement. "I trusted him to handle the finances, and now I'm discovering accounts I didn't even know existed." She looked directly at my wife. "You do know about all your accounts, right? Joint access to everything?" My wife nodded, but I could see her making mental notes again. We'd always handled money together, never had secrets about spending or saving, but now she was looking at our arrangement like it might be hiding something sinister. Friday brought the emotional manipulation master class. Her sister had been crying on and off all day, telling increasingly dramatic stories. But these weren't random venting sessions. Each story was specifically chosen to highlight a behavior that could be twisted to sound controlling or dismissive. "He used to say I was being too sensitive whenever I brought up problems," she told my wife while I was working in the next room. "That's classic gaslighting. They make you question your own reality until you stop trusting yourself." Later that evening, when my wife brought up something minor about weekend plans, I made the mistake of suggesting we could talk about it later since I was dealing with a work deadline. Simple time management, nothing more. But her sister had trained her to hear something else entirely. "You're dismissing me," my wife said, her voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before. "You're making me feel like my concerns don't matter." The accusation was so unexpected that I stopped what I was doing completely. "That's not what I meant at all. I just wanted to give you my full attention after I finished this." "That's what they all say," her sister called from the kitchen. "Work always comes first until suddenly you realize you've been completely sidelined in your own relationship." Saturday morning revealed just how effective the week's programming had been. My wife was acting like a completely different person. She questioned everything, why I chose that particular coffee shop for our morning walk, whether I was really listening when she talked, why I hadn't asked about her day in exactly the way she expected. Each question came with a new analytical tone, like she was conducting an investigation rather than having a conversation. And behind every question I could hear her sister's voice providing the interpretive framework. "I'm just trying to be more aware of patterns," my wife explained when I asked why everything felt so tense. My sister helped me realize that I might not be as assertive as I should be. Sunday brought the comparison game. Her sister started telling detailed stories about the early days of her marriage, carefully editing them to highlight how similar her ex was to me. Same sense of humor, same way of handling conflict, same small gestures that she now interpreted as manipulation tactics. "He used to bring me coffee in bed too," she said, watching me hand my wife her morning cup. "I thought it was sweet until I realized he was conditioning me to expect less and less effort over time. Start with grand gestures, then gradually scale back until doing nothing feels normal." My wife accepted the coffee but didn't thank me the way she usually did. Instead, she looked at it suspiciously, like it might be part of some elaborate psychological scheme. By the end of week 2, I was living with a stranger who happened to look like my wife. Every interaction was filtered through this new lens of suspicion and analysis. She'd started using phrases that weren't hers, thinking thoughts that had been planted by someone else. The most disturbing part wasn't the change itself, but how systematic it was. Her sister wasn't just venting about her divorce. She was conducting a carefully orchestrated campaign to transform my wife's entire worldview about relationships and men. And it was working. Week 3 was when I lost my wife completely. The woman who woke up next to me every morning looked the same, but everything else had been systematically replaced. Her voice, her thoughts, her entire way of processing reality had been hijacked by someone who saw enemies everywhere. Monday started with the new vocabulary. Over breakfast, she casually dropped phrases like emotional labor and mental load into conversation, terms she'd never used before, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd just discovered revolutionary truths. "I've been thinking about how much emotional labor I do in this relationship," she announced while stirring her coffee. My sister helped me realize that I'm always the one managing our social calendar, remembering important dates, keeping track of household needs. I looked at her confused. "You mean like planning dinner with your parents next weekend? The dinner you wanted to have?" "That's not the point," she said, using that new analytical tone. "The point is that you automatically assume I'll handle it. That's called emotional outsourcing." Her sister nodded approvingly from across the table. "It's invisible work that women do because men have been socialized to expect it." Tuesday brought the red flag identification workshop. Every normal interaction was now scrutinized for signs of controlling behavior. When I mentioned that I'd prefer to stay home instead of going to her CO workers' party on Friday, she pounced. "Why don't you want me to socialize with my friends?" "I never said you couldn't go," I replied. "I just said I'd rather stay home. You can still go. But you're making me choose between you and my social life. That's isolation tactics." Her sister chimed in from the living room. Classic move. "They make you feel guilty for having independent relationships." Wednesday was the gaslighting seminar. Apparently, everything I said now qualified as psychological manipulation. When I pointed out that she'd been unusually critical all week, she turned it around immediately. "You're trying to make me question my own perceptions," she said. "My sister warned me you'd do this when I started standing up for myself." "I'm not trying to make you question anything," I said. "I'm just pointing out that you've been different lately." "Different how? More aware, more assertive, less willing to accept substandard treatment." The conversation had become impossible. Every response I gave was interpreted as further evidence of manipulation. Her sister had taught her to see malice in everything, and now she was applying that filter to 3 years of perfectly normal marriage. Thursday brought the financial audit. My wife announced that she wanted to review all our accounts and spending patterns, not because we had money problems, but because her sister had convinced her that financial transparency was a test of relationship health. "I need to understand exactly where our money goes," she said, spreading bank statements across the kitchen table. "And I want separate accounts for discretionary spending." "We've never had problems with money," I said. "Why the sudden change?" "It's not sudden. It's overdue." My sister helped me realize that financial independence is crucial for relationship equality. Her sister emerged from the guest room with a stack of divorce papers, timing her entrance perfectly. "Financial dependence is how they trap you," she said. "Once you can't leave, they stop pretending to be decent." Friday was relationship evaluation day. My wife had apparently been keeping notes all week, documenting every interaction for analysis. She presented her findings like a performance review, complete with areas for improvement and behavioral expectations. "I've identified several patterns that need to change," she announced over dinner. "You interrupt me an average of 3 times per conversation, you make unilateral decisions about weekend activities 60% of the time, and you use dismissive language when I express concerns." I stared at her. "You've been counting my interruptions? My sister taught me to pay attention to these things. Data doesn't lie." Her sister nodded sagely. "Numbers reveal the truth that emotions can hide." Saturday brought the ultimatum framework. Every discussion now came with threats of consequences if I didn't meet her newly established standards. The collaborative partnership we'd built over 3 years had been replaced by a system of demands and punishments. "I need you to acknowledge that you've been emotionally unavailable," she said during our morning walk. "And I need concrete steps for how you're going to change." Emotionally unavailable? How? You don't ask about my feelings enough. You don't validate my experiences. You don't create safe spaces for vulnerability. These were phrases straight from her sister's divorce playbook. My wife was reciting memorized talking points, not expressing genuine concerns. Sunday was the breaking point. During what used to be our relaxed weekend morning routine, my wife launched into a full analysis of our power dynamics and communication patterns. She had become a stranger, conducting therapy sessions on someone she no longer recognized. "My sister helped me understand that I've been settling," she announced while we were supposed to be enjoying coffee and the newspaper. "I've been accepting mediocrity because I didn't know I deserved better." Mediocrity? I set down my coffee cup. "Is that how you see our marriage?" "I see our marriage clearly for the first time," she said, without the rose-colored glasses that keep women trapped in unfulfilling relationships. Her sister appeared in the doorway, fully dressed despite it being barely 8 in the morning. "That's the hardest part," she said, admitting that what you thought was love was actually just comfortable dysfunction. As I sat there listening to my wife recite these borrowed philosophies, I realized the transformation was complete. The woman I'd married no longer existed. In her place was someone who spoke in feminist theory buzzwords, who analyzed every gesture for hidden meanings, who measured every interaction against impossible standards of perfection. She'd become her sister's clone, programmed with the same bitter worldview, the same suspicious mindset, the same conviction that all men were fundamentally flawed and all women were victims waiting to be enlightened. That afternoon, while they were out shopping together, I made a decision. I called a lawyer, not because I wanted a divorce, but because I needed to understand my options. If my wife was going to continue down this path, I needed to be prepared. The consultation was enlightening. The lawyer had seen cases like this before. Wives influenced by recently divorced friends or family members, marriages destroyed by outside interference, relationships that couldn't survive the constant injection of suspicion and resentment. "Document everything," he advised. "Keep records of the changes in behavior, the outside influence, the unreasonable demands. If this continues, you'll need evidence that the breakdown wasn't your fault." Week 4, the dinner that destroyed everything, happened on a Sunday evening. My wife had invited her parents over, supposedly to catch up and check on her sister's progress. What I didn't realize was that her sister had planned this as the perfect stage for my public execution. Her parents arrived at 6, bringing flowers and wine like they always did. They're good people who raised their daughters to be respectful and kind. At least they raised one of them that way. The other one was sitting at our dining table like a prosecutor preparing to present evidence. Dinner started normally enough. We talked about work, the weather, some family gossip. Her father complimented the roast I'd made, and her mother asked about our vacation plans for the summer. Standard family dinner conversation that should have been pleasant and relaxed. But I could feel the tension building. My wife kept exchanging looks with her sister like they were waiting for the right moment to spring their trap. The first crack appeared when her father asked me about a promotion opportunity at work. I explained that I'd turned it down because it would require relocating, and we both agreed that staying put was better for our relationship. "Both agreed," her sister interrupted. "Or did you decide and then convince her it was a mutual decision?" The question came out of nowhere, sharp and accusatory. Her parents looked confused, but my wife was nodding slightly, like her sister had identified something important. "We discussed it thoroughly," I said, keeping my voice level. "We both concluded the benefits didn't outweigh the drawbacks." "Interesting," her sister continued. "Because in my experience, when men say, 'we decided,' They usually mean I decided and she went along with it. Her mother tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. 20 minutes later, her sister struck again. I was telling a story about a funny encounter at the grocery store and inadvertently corrected a small detail my wife had gotten wrong. Nothing major, just that it happened on Tuesday instead of Wednesday. The kind of minor adjustment that happens in every couple's storytelling. But her sister pounced. "Did you see that?" she said, looking directly at my wife while pointing at me. "He just interrupted you to correct something completely irrelevant. That's exactly how my ex used to undermine me in front of other people." The table went silent. Her parents looked shocked, but my wife was nodding again, processing this new evidence of my controlling behavior. "I wasn't undermining anything," I said calmly. "I was just clarifying a detail." "That's what they always say," her sister shot back. "But the real message is that your version isn't good enough, that you can't be trusted to tell a story accurately. It's a form of public humiliation disguised as helpful correction." Her father looked uncomfortable. "I think you might be reading too much into—" "No, Dad," my wife interrupted, her voice taking on that new edge. "She's right. He does this all the time. I just never noticed it before." The betrayal hit like a physical blow. My wife was choosing her sister's interpretation over 3 years of respectful partnership. She was rewriting our entire history to fit this narrative of oppression and control. Her mother tried again to redirect, but her sister wasn't finished. She'd identified her moment of maximum impact. "You know what the worst part is?" she said, making sure she had everyone's attention. "Women are trained to normalize this behavior. We're taught that men interrupting us, correcting us, dismissing our perspectives, that it's all just normal relationship dynamics." She turned to my wife with an expression of deep concern. "But it's not normal, honey. It's death by 1,000 cuts. First they control your voice, then they control your thoughts, then they control your life." My wife was hanging on every word. "You're right," she said quietly. "I have been settling." Then she turned to me, and I saw a stranger behind her eyes. "I deserve better than this." Her sister smiled triumphantly. Her father tried one last time. "Maybe we should talk about this privately." "No, Dad," my wife said firmly. "I'm tired of keeping quiet about things that bother me. My sister helped me realize I've been enabling bad behavior by not calling it out." I sat there absorbing the full scope of what had just happened in front of her parents, in our own home. My wife had chosen to embrace her sister's toxic worldview and reject everything we'd built together. But as I looked around that table, her parents embarrassed and confused, her sister smug and victorious, my wife convinced she'd just found her voice, I realized this moment was actually a gift. Her sister had just shown me exactly who my wife really was underneath all the years of partnership and affection. Someone who could be manipulated, someone who would choose the dramatic narrative over the boring truth, someone who would throw away 3 years of happiness because someone else convinced her she was a victim. And her sister had just given me the perfect opportunity to respond. I stood up slowly. "You know what?" I said calmly. "Your sister is absolutely right." The silence that followed was electric. No one had expected me to agree, especially not her sister, whose expression shifted from triumph to confusion in half a second. "Your sister is absolutely right about divorce," I continued, maintaining perfect calm. "She managed to free herself from a man who didn't appreciate her, and now she's given me the chance to free myself from a woman who doesn't appreciate me." My wife's mouth dropped open. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about clarity," I said, looking directly at her sister. "For 4 weeks I've watched you systematically poison my wife against me. And you know what? You've done me a huge favor." Her sister's smugness was evaporating fast. "I was protecting her." "You were recruiting her," I interrupted. "And you succeeded. You turned my wife into someone who sees manipulation in every gesture, control in every conversation, oppression in every disagreement. Congratulations." I turned to my wife, who looked like she was seeing me for the first time. "And you let her do it. You chose to believe someone who's been here 4 weeks over someone who's been here 3 years. But she helped me realize—" "She helped you realize nothing," I cut her off. "She programmed you to see problems that didn't exist. She took a happy woman and turned her into a paranoid stranger who questions everything her husband does." Her parents were watching with horrified fascination. "You want to know what your sister really did?" I continued. "She couldn't stand seeing you happy in a marriage while hers fell apart. So she decided to drag you down with her." Her sister finally found her voice. "That's not true. I was showing her how to recognize—" How to recognize what? Love? Partnership? Respect? I laughed coldly. You showed her how to destroy something good because you couldn't handle being the only failure in the family. The truth was hitting home. Her sister's face flushed red. Every story you told about your ex, every piece of advice about red flags, every lesson about standing up for herself, it was all designed to make her dissatisfied with a man who actually cared about her. I looked at my wife again, and the sad part is, it worked. You threw away 3 years of partnership because someone convinced you that you were a victim. Her father finally spoke up. Maybe we should all calm down. I am calm, I said. Calmer than I've been in weeks, because your daughter just showed me exactly who she really is underneath all the years of pretending to be a supportive partner. I walked to the counter where I'd left a manila envelope earlier that day. You want independence? You want to be free from a controlling man? Here's your freedom. I placed the divorce papers on the table in front of her. The shock on everyone's faces was complete. You've been complaining about my behavior for weeks, I said, questioning my motives, analyzing my words, treating me like a suspect in my own home. So I'm giving you what you really want, the chance to be right about everything. My wife stared at the papers like they might explode. But I don't want a divorce. Yes, you do, I said firmly. You just spent 4 weeks proving it. Every conversation, every accusation, every time you chose to believe her over me. You've been building a case for why this marriage doesn't work. Her sister tried to intervene. You're being manipulative. I'm being honest, I shot back. Something you wouldn't recognize if it bit you. You came here to destroy a marriage and you succeeded. Own it. I looked around the table one final time. Your sister wanted you to be independent, suspicious, and strong. Now you can be all three, alone. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, her mother whispered, "This has gone too far." You're right, I agreed. It went too far 3 weeks ago when I allowed a bitter, manipulative woman to move into my home and systematically destroy my marriage. But it ends now. I picked up my keys. I'll be staying at a hotel tonight. The papers are self-explanatory. Your sister can help you understand them. She's such an expert on divorce. As I headed for the door, my wife finally found her voice. Wait, please. I didn't mean for this to happen. Yes, you did, I said, turning back one last time. You chose this. Every day for 4 weeks you chose to listen to her instead of trusting me. You chose to see problems instead of solutions. You chose her version of reality over ours. But the first love you... No, I said quietly. You love the idea of being a victim more than you love being my wife. Your sister taught you that, and you were an excellent student. I opened the front door and paused. Your sister was right about one thing. Sometimes divorce really is the best option. 3 days later, they both showed up at my hotel. I'd been expecting it. The shock had worn off, reality had set in, and now came the damage control phase. But I was ready. I met them in the lobby, neutral ground, witnesses nearby. My wife looked terrible. Dark circles under her eyes, hair unwashed, the look of someone who'd finally understood the consequences of her choices. Her sister looked defensive, already preparing justifications. We need to talk, my wife said. No, we don't, I replied calmly. We needed to talk 4 weeks ago. Now we need lawyers. Please just listen. I've been listening for a month. I cut her off. I listened to you question every decision I made, analyze every word I said, choose her interpretation of our marriage over your own experience of it. Her sister stepped forward. You're being unreasonable. She just wanted to grow. She wanted to grow into what? I laughed. A paranoid, suspicious woman who sees manipulation in every interaction? Congratulations. Mission accomplished. I looked directly at her sister. You destroyed your own marriage with this toxic mindset, and couldn't stand that your sister was happy. So you infected her with the same poison that ruined your life. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened, I said. You turned her into you, bitter, alone, and convinced every man is the enemy. The only difference is she had to destroy something good to get there. My wife was crying. I realize I made mistakes. You didn't make mistakes, I corrected. You made choices. Every day for 4 weeks. You chose to believe I was your enemy instead of your partner. But I was confused. You were influenced, I said, by someone who wanted you to fail as badly as she did, and you let her succeed. Her sister's mask slipped completely. You're a manipulative bastard. I'm a man who recognized manipulation when he saw it, I replied calmly, and I chose not to be a victim of it. I looked at my wife one final time. You had a choice every single day. Trust the man you'd been happy with for 3 years, or believe the woman who destroyed her own marriage. You chose her version of reality over ours. I made a mistake. You made a choice, I said. And choices have consequences. Your consequence is getting exactly what your sister has: independence, strength, and complete solitude. I walked toward the elevator. Enjoy your freedom. It comes with everything your sister promised: no more interruptions, no more corrections, no more partnership. Just you, her, and all the space you need to be strong and independent. As the elevator doors closed, I could hear my wife calling my name, but I didn't turn around. The woman I'd married was gone, replaced by her sister's creation, and I wasn't interested in trying to resurrect someone who'd chosen to die. Her sister had won completely. She'd successfully recruited another casualty for her war against relationships. Now they could be bitter together, analyzing all the ways men had failed them, never realizing they destroyed the one thing that could have proven their theories wrong. Perfect sisterhood, perfect misery, exactly what she'd always wanted. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.